Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this telephone town hall meeting on education in Nova Scotia hosted by the NDP caucus. Right now, we're waiting for more people to join the call, and we'll wait a few minutes until everyone's had a chance to join. My name's Kyle, and I'm going to be your moderator for the evening, and I'll walk you through what today's going to look like. First off, we're going to go through the structure of the event, and in a moment, I'm going to ask Claudia Chender, the MLA for Dartmouth South, and the education spokesperson for the NDP caucus to say a few words about the current proposals for changes to the education system. After Claudia speaks, I will invite Gary Burrill, the MLA for Halifax-Shabukjo and the leader of the NDP caucus, to speak about the impacts of centralization in education. After that, we're going to open up the phone lines for anyone on the call who would like to ask a question or make a comment about the situation in education. We're going to have several thousand people on this call, and we'll try to get through as many questions as possible. If you want to get in the queue to speak, to ask a question or to make a comment, you can press *3 at any time, and you'll be shifted to one of our operators. Throughout the evening, we're also going to be asking a number of poll questions. To answer these questions, you'll simply press one of the numbers on your phone. You're under no obligation to answer the questions, but your feedback will help direct the work of the NDP caucus as we get ready for the legislative session that's going to begin later this month. So again, we're just waiting for a few more people to join the call, and we'll get started here in just a few minutes. We're going to again hear from Claudia Chender, the MLA for Dartmouth South, and from the NDP leader, Gary Burrill. And again, throughout the evening, if you've got any questions or you'd like to get in the queue, if you'd like to make a comment, press *3 and you'll be directed towards our moderator. So we're going to get started, and it looks like a lot of folks have joined the call tonight. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, and we're going to proceed. So I'd like to ask Claudia Chender, the MLA for Dartmouth South and the education person for the NDP caucus, to say a few words about the current proposals for changes in our education system. Claudia?
Hi, everybody. Thanks for staying on the line with us. This is my first time doing a teletown hall, and it really is a privilege to be able to speak to people right across the province who are interested in the future of education. It's not often we get a chance to do that. As Kyle said, my name's Claudia Chender, and I'm the education spokesperson for the NDP caucus and the MLA for Dartmouth South. There have been a number of fora, especially in the last week or two, to discuss and dissect the Glaze report and its implications, but we did feel that it was really important that we offer one of our own. We feel that way for a few reasons. One is that I've actually heard from a number of people who have said, where is the opposition voice? Where is the opposition voice to these sweeping reforms about which many people are rightly very upset? And my response has been, our stance has been very clear from day one. As far as we're concerned, we have a very strong voice and we're using it. Now, how far and how quickly that voice permeates the public media cycle, unfortunately, is not always in our control. Certainly, as we move back into the legislature, you'll hear more from everyone as legislation that we anticipate to be introduced is introduced. But I want to be clear that from the beginning we have said that, the process for this report was faulty. We've talked about that a number of times now. Dr. Glaze says that our children's results are not good enough. A number of experts have refuted that and have said that, in fact, if we judge our children by standardized testing alone, which is not my preference, but let's say we do, that, coming fourth consistently after the big three, Alberta, BC, and Ontario, is in fact probably right about where we might expect our children to be. The findings of this report, therefore, were flawed. They were based on some faulty information. They were also happened to coincide directly with an ideological program that the Liberal government has been very clear about for years now. And lastly, we believe strongly that the adoption of the recommendations in this report will be folly. They will be deeply problematic. And we'll talk about that a little more in a minute. I've spent the last few weeks in my capacity as spokesperson speaking with basically everyone who wants to have a conversation with me, and those have included teachers, administrators, certainly parents, We've met a few times with the Nova Scotia School Board Association, the Nova Scotia Teachers Union, the Canadian Union of Public Employees. I've spoken with professors at teachers' colleges and master's programs, and of course been speaking with the public. And I would say that the clear thread that has emerged from those conversations has been that people are completely dismayed at the disregard for the experience of the tens of thousands of children in Nova Scotian classrooms. This report, as many have said before me, will not do anything to address those challenging classroom conditions that we've known about for some time. And I have to say, and I've said it before, that as a parent of 3 young children, 2 of whom are in school, I echo that feeling. My twin daughters started school just before Work to Rule began last year. And that, I regret that on their behalf. And on behalf of the province of Nova Scotia, I think they deserve an apology. And my son starts next year, and I'm concerned that he'll go into an even worse situation. As I said, the report's not going to make things better for students. Parents and teachers have been very clear about what's needed in the classroom. The main thing that is needed to fix our education system right now is more support in the classroom. A commission has been struck to look at that very issue, the Commission on Inclusion, and we know that its report is due March 31st. So why the government wants to accept a report within 24 hours of its publication and ram it through just in time to finish both the legislative changes required and the passing of a new budget to fund it before we see the results of the independent panel that is doing the work to grapple with the tough question of how do we help children in the classroom. Now, that commission isn't grappling with all the tough questions, but it's certainly grappling with a big one. So I think it's really problematic that the timing of all of this. And I want to say that I met this morning with someone who runs a faculty of education here in the province. And what she said to me is that people don't often realize this. She said, I deal with more teachers in the run of a month than almost anyone else in the province for my job. And she said, if I had to say what the number one indicator of student success in a classroom would be, I might say teacher morale. She said, because people don't realize, and everyone knows this in their own workplace, if morale is low, you can't perform at your job. And whatever your opinion of the mess that we're in with labor, the reality is that these actions of the current government to ram these findings through of the Glaze report is salt in the wound. And it will do nothing to help the morale of teachers, which is at an all-time low, and it will do everything to make it worse. So this is very problematic. It's problematic because we're already facing a teacher shortage in this province. This began after Bill 75. It's increased, and I should say that when I asked the Minister of Education about this in the legislature, he told me that this was a good problem to have, that it was a good problem to have that we had a teacher shortage because it meant they had hired too many teachers. So obviously I respectfully disagree. I think it's a bad problem to have, and I think it foreshadows what we're seeing in healthcare. So again, as others have said before me, the consolidation that we are seeing right now, this proposed provincial advisory council, which would be appointed, which would report to the minister, this is an analog for what we've seen in healthcare for the single Nova Scotia Health Authority. It's consolidated in Halifax. It will be unable and or unwilling to attend to the unique needs across the system and across the province. There will be a lack of transparency, and there is no guarantee that the people on that provincial advisory council will have any qualification other than being friendly with the government, which is what we've seen on other appointed councils. So that's very concerning to us. But I think it should be of a concern to anyone who values transparency. People have issues with school boards. People have all kinds of different opinions about all the sweeping changes suggested in this report. But I would suggest that there is nowhere in this report that even nods at the idea of transparency. And that's really, really problematic. The last thing I want to say is that not surprisingly, our caucus is extremely concerned about protecting our most vulnerable students. By eliminating school boards, again, we're not saying school boards are perfect. We're not saying they don't need reform. But by eliminating them, we eliminate the dedicated African Nova Scotia seats and the dedicated Indigenous seats that are on those boards. We lose the only body in this province that is looking at the school system and its learners in a totality and actually have a charge to pay attention equally to all of them. And we are very, very afraid that the most marginalized students, the ones whose parents are not on the school advisory councils, the ones who are already falling through the cracks, will fall further behind. So I know that's a lot, but I have a lot of feelings on this subject, and I thank you for taking the time to listen.
Great. Thank you so much, Claudia. We're going to quickly do a poll question and then take a quick question on the phones before we go to our next speaker. I will remind folks that if you press *3 at any time, you can get in the queue to ask a question or to make a comment. So right now, we're going to do our first poll question. And this poll question is, in your opinion, what is the most important issue facing students in the classroom today? Press 1 if you think class sizes are too large. Press 2 if you think there are not enough specialists in the classroom. Press 3 if you believe there are inadequate supports for students with special needs. And press 4 for mental health issues. Again, the question is, in your opinion, what is the most important issue facing students in the classroom today? You can press 1 for class sizes, press 2 for not enough specialists, press 3 for inadequate support for students with special needs, or press 4 for mental health issues. We'll just give folks a quick second to ask or answer that poll question. And again, you can press *3 at any time to get in the queue to ask a question or to make a comment. So our poll results are in, and it seems like 38% of people said inadequate supports for students with special needs, followed by 22% saying that class sizes are too large. I'm going to go to the phones for a moment, and we're going to talk to Dawson, who is a grade 12 student at Glace Bay High. Dawson, are you there?
Hello. Yeah, I'm here.
Great, Dawson. What's your question?
Well, I have a comment too. Basically, the McNeil Liberals. What's a concern for me as a grade 12 student is, are students going to be able to graduate, right? I mean, like Mr. McNeil has attacked the basic rights enshrined in the Charter. He's basically supported 5 pieces of legislation that violates those rights. Now, what's concerning to me is, upon discovery of the notwithstanding clause in the Charter, which would exempt it from the court challenge, is this going to make this province more unattractive to professionals like doctors, teachers, and all kinds of other people who need them? And
Great.
it's a concern.
Thanks for your question, Dawson. Claudia, did you want to reply to that?
It's Gary. Kyle, I'll just say a word.
Oh, great. Thanks, Gary.
Dawson, thanks so much for thinking about this with us, and thanks everybody for being together tonight for our thinking on this super important question that's before the province. I think the matter you raised, Dawson, about the Charter is very important. We shouldn't forget that one of the most important things that has happened in education in Nova Scotia in recent history is that the government, just a year ago, abrogated the charter right of teachers as members of a union to collectively bargain a contract under which they do their work. That's Bill 75. That is what has caused the enormous undermining of morale amongst teachers that Claudia has spoken so clearly about. It's a very, very important matter. And the second thing that you speak about, the importance for schools in our communities, speaks to this. We know in Nova Scotia that we have a lot that is profoundly attractive. We have communities that are vibrant, full of all kinds of wonderful people. Our communities are places where people are looking to come and bring their families up. We see this all over the province. But in order for this to work, we have to have a couple things. One is we have to have health care, but we have to have schools. And when people are looking at whether they're going to bring their children and their families up in the community of Nova Scotia, this is a primary, top-of-the-list question. What is the situation like with schools in that community? So that when the government abrogates the Charter of Rights and overturns the right of teachers to bargain the conditions under which they do their work and undermines the morale of the teachers of the province, so that we have all kinds of teachers who for years have worked every night of the week volunteering, coaching this and producing that and taking kids somewhere else, who now are at a place where they say, I don't know if it's worth it for me to do that anymore. When the government has done that, it has a very diminishing effect on the quality of the education of kids in the province. So you're absolutely right, I'm convinced, to bring up both these points.
Great, thanks for that, Gary. I'm going to go to another question from callers. I think we've got Steve with us. Steve, are you there?
I am.
Okay, what was your question, Steve?
My question was more of a statement than a question, because I remember when years ago when they started closing the school, the little community schools, the one-room schoolhouse, where we got our education, and not only the teachers but the parents and everyone kind of taught us, and they started putting us into this feeder system with buses, and I guess my statement more than the question was, I hope everyone leaves this meeting with the reaffirmation that the children are the future of this country. Now, every political party states that. It's not about money, it's not about school busing, it's not about politics. It's about the education of the children. And I applaud your efforts here tonight. I just don't see a way out of the morass. I mean, it's a very puzzling thing. I guess it was more of a statement than a question.
No worries whatsoever. Thanks for joining us.
I appreciate comments on that statement, though.
Okay, Gary or Claudia, did you want to reply?
Sure. Steve, it's Claudia here. I also want to thank you, and I think you've hit the nail on the head. And I think you're pointing to something which the last caller also mentioned, which is it's not hyperbole to say that, we need to be paying the most attention to children, because if we want to talk about growing our economy, if we want to talk about attracting doctors, if we want to talk about our rural communities, it all starts with children. And if we don't have good education, if we don't have good community, if we don't have good daycare, and if we don't have good opportunities, it's the canary in the coal mine for our province, and it's one of the reasons that we are paying such close attention to this issue, and that we're doing what we can. So I really appreciate your view, and I would say that we very much agree with it.
Thanks so much, Claudia. And a reminder, folks, you can press *3 to get in the queue to ask a question or make a comment. We're going to go to another question on the phones from Janet. Janet, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Hi, Janet. What's your question?
My question concerns the Glaze Report recommendation that principals and vice principals be put out of the union. I'm a retired teacher, and in my 32 years of working in the province, I had a number of principals, all of whom I had great respect for, with possible exception of two. But the relationship between the teachers and the principals was a collegial relationship where we worked together to solve problems and do the best for our students. I really believe that having principals and vice principals leave the union would be detrimental to the educational process. It would be awful to think that in a school, teachers would regard the principal as someone separate from them, someone who could react against them in some way and not work with them to improve the atmosphere at the school and the educational outcomes of the children. That's
Great.
More a comment, I guess, than a question.
Well, I think we're getting a lot of those tonight. Thank you, Janet. Gary or Claudia, did you want to reply to that?
Hi, Janet. It's Claudia here. what you say echoes what I've heard from many other teachers and many other principals and vice principals, in fact. But the teachers I've spoken to have said almost across the board that they see the principals in their schools as their supporters and instructional leads. And first and foremost, their colleagues. We know that most provinces in Nova Scotia use this model, that most vice principals and teachers are in the same union, that they are collegial, that they do have a collaborative model in that way. We further believe, as I think I said before, that, it's not for the government to dictate how this unfolds. If the government identifies this as a problem, then it behooves them to sit down with teachers, to sit down with admins, to sit down with the NSTU and hammer it out. To the best of our knowledge, that didn't happen at all. And the last I'll say is that, as we've heard in recent days, the principals and vice principals are now going to be forced to choose. And many of the administrators I've spoken to say that they identify themselves as teachers first and as administrators second. And it's a very terrible position to be put in, to be forced to make that choice. It's not something that should be forced upon them at all. And further, we know that if, most teachers, particularly in rural areas, most administrators are in the classroom at least part of the time, especially with the current teacher shortage. So it's certainly going to be a very difficult situation, not just the reality that people will be upset about it who find themselves directly impacted, but this is a place where it is very likely that students will suffer. They'll suffer from the lack of continuity. They'll suffer from reduced availability of instructional leads in the classroom and from fewer resources available to their own teachers in the way of mentoring and assistance. So couldn't agree with you more, and thank you so much for your comment.
Thank you, Claudia. We're going to go to our next poll question. Our next poll question is, what do you think will be the primary impact of eliminating locally elected school boards? You can press 1 if your answer is decisions will be made without local impact. Press 2 for it will distract from addressing the real issues in the classroom. Press 3 for it will save money. And press 4 if you don't think there will be any impact. Again, the question is, what do you think the primary impact of eliminating locally elected school boards will be? Is it 1, the decisions will be made without local input? 2, it will distract from addressing the real issues in the classroom? Is it 3, it will save money? Or 4, there will be no impact? Please take a moment to vote right now. And after that, we're going to go to a question from Stacy. Stacy, are you there with us?
I am. Hello.
Great. What was your question, Stacy?
Well, first I have a comment about morale in the school. I think one of the things that I've noticed myself with the teachers that I know is that they are all parents who have the same concerns that the rest of us have. Their children are in the school system. Their children are having their own sets of struggles, and they are forced to, I guess, maybe remain quiet about their own children's concerns and issues with regard to everything that's being said. But the idea that our government is maligning and demeaning the most important personas outside of the family household, for children to go to school and be expected to be inspired, or for them, for teachers to be expected to be able to inspire these children and, I guess, guide these children and keep these children in line on a day-to-day basis when, at home their heads are being exposed to some of this incredibly negative feedback from the government, to me, has to be creating even more problems for the teachers in the classrooms when it comes to the diversity in the classroom and the behavior and so on. But what I really wanted to talk about was the school advisory councils that the government claims are going to be empowered and that they're going to be the local voices and they're going to be our access to the school curriculums and issues and things like that. And I've been doing a bit of research on school advisory councils, and wherever I can find things available publicly. Some of the school councils aren't necessarily publishing their minutes or publishing their memorandums of understanding with the school board, or even details about their structure. But from what I hear, they're all pretty much the same. And right now, these councils are limited to very small bodies of individuals and are limited to who can participate. They don't really make, I guess, an effort to include parents of children with learning disabilities, or even members from each grade, or diverse cultural inclusion. There's really not a lot of room there for all of the affected bodies to be included. As well, when I read their minutes and when I read what they're responsible for, and when I look at what they're doing in these councils, it's more about what the school needs from a library perspective, or a sporting goods perspective, or activities. They talk about what the PTA is doing in fundraising. They discuss events at the schools. They're not talking or dealing with curriculum. And I guess the minister's message about having small budgets for playground equipment and school jerseys and things cements that probably isn't going to change. And that creates, to me, a kind of a gap between what the government is saying and what the truth is about how we go forward with regard to the public being engaged in what's going on in the schools. I have a really big problem with that.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Stacey. Claudia or Gary, did you want to reply to that?
Yes, Stacey, it's Gary. Thanks so much for how clearly you've articulated this. And I think that you've used two very important words in your first point. You spoke about teachers being maligned and demeaned. I think these are exactly the words to describe what has happened. And it's a heartbreaking thing to see. I'll just maybe say a word about my own background. My children are all grown. I raised them in a community in the Musquodoboit Valley, my wife and I, where it's fair to say there was not a great deal of privilege. My children and the kids that they grew up going to school with, the reason that they had basketball was that their teachers provided basketball. The reason they had soccer was that their teachers provided it. The reason they got some drama was that their teachers, music the same. This came almost entirely, it was in communities without music teachers other than the teachers in the school. So that as we see all over the province, there are communities where highly motivated, highly qualified teachers are practically carrying the community on their shoulders. And so anything that diminishes their sense of looking forward to the future and their sense that this wonderful teaching vocation is the one for them is a very, very big problem for us. So I think this first point you made is very critical. I think your second point is very important too about the SACs. When we ask, well, look, what is the school advisory committee? What is that going to do to fill up the hole that we presently have with school boards? Let's remember that when the Minister of Education, Zach Churchill, went to have a meeting in the Halifax area with the Halifax Regional School Board SAC chairs, they couldn't even figure out how many of them there were in order to be able to have a meeting and see that everybody was allowed in and get a chair. That's how much they think about the authority or the governance of a school advisory committee. There's all the world of difference between a body whose purpose is to provide advice and counsel to the government and a body which is elected who have authority in order to be able to govern. So I think you're right to point out both of these problems, the terrible problem of the demeaning of teachers and the very serious problem of thinking that the school advisory committee is going to be able to fill the hole left by the abolition of elected democratic governing school boards.
Great. Thanks for that, Gary. I'm going to go to Steve on the phone. Steve, are you with us?
Yes, I am. Hello.
Go ahead, please.
Yes. So my point was that having witnessed here the near closure of Petite Rivière School until the review board reversed the school board decision, I'm concerned that it's just going to get worse when all the school boards are abolished and all the decisions are made centrally from Halifax, and all these rural areas which need community schools, just like churches and town halls and whatnot, to thrive and attract more residents and build a homogeneous, or not homogeneous, but a tight community. That all that's going to disappear in favor of just treating us like a suburb of Halifax from one end of the province to the other. And I'm concerned that rural areas will be just, will lose in the process their distinctive character or their local liveliness. It's a very major concern for me that everything might be centralized. We saw it almost happen with Petite Rivière, and I'm afraid that the plan outlined by the Department of Education and the new report that came out is just going to make things worse for other rural areas in Nova Scotia.
Thanks for sharing that, Steve. Claudia or Gary, did you want to reply?
Sure, I'll jump in, and then if Gary has something, he's welcome to add. I mean, we, as with everyone interested in education, have been following what's been going on in Petite pretty closely. And Steve, I think you've hit the nail on the head. I mean, I know that in the tireless efforts that your community has put in to save Petite School, there has been a lot of clashing with the school board. But I think that you've very astutely recognized that it's better to have someone to clash with than no one. And the reality is that, however difficult or recalcitrant school boards may appear or be experienced as, it's pretty clear that you're, worse off without them. Because you may not even have a phone number to call
right.
the next time a small school is shut down. And as you say, to the point of consolidating everything in Halifax, that makes it doubly bad because at least the school board that you're dealing with has the view of a region. But in this case, you'll be dealing with school boards that have a view of a province and a pretty myopic one, judging from past experience of other bodies that have been centralized. So I think that you're right to be concerned. And I think that, what we see now is that when people in rural areas complain, again, to use the analogy of health, to the now single health authority about issues in their community, if they complain to the Department of Health, the Department of Health says, oh, no, that's the NSHA's department. And if they complain to the NSHA, then the NSHA will often say, oh, no, that's the Department of Health. And there's a bit of a game of who's on first. And we anticipate that, it's very likely that the same thing will happen. We'll have a provincial advisory council. It will sit here. It will not be transparent as far as we've been able to tell. And there won't be a transparent process to follow when you disagree with its decisions. And it's one of the reasons that despite some challenges that people have with school boards, we believe it's very important that those transparent, accountable bodies remain in some form. So thank you very much for your question.
Yeah, and it's scary, Steve. I also just want to echo what Claudia said, that we in the NDP and the people around the province celebrate together this great victory to keep the Petite School open. It's a real testament to the community and fighting spirit of the parents and the kids and the families of Petite. But I think back my own experience, going back now for quite a number of years in the movement to keep rural schools open. I think back about how in Upper Muscataba, the community that I lived in for many years, how 3 different times within a 10-year period, bureaucrats imposed a review on that school for closure. 3 different times, the members of that community organized themselves and went to the elected school board and persuaded the members of the elected school board that the bureaucratic recommendation to shut the school in that community was a mistake. And the elected members of the school board had the power to overturn it. Without that power being in elected people who are accountable to the members of communities, who knows what kind of negativity can be visited on the rural communities of the province.
Thanks for that, Gary. And a reminder, folks, you can press *3 at any time to get in the queue to ask a question. We are receiving a lot of questions and comments right now, so it is taking some time to get connected to an operator. But again, you can press *3 to get connected and to get in the queue to ask a question. I'm going to go take another question, and then we're going to do one of our poll questions after that. We're going to go to Anne. Anne, are you with us?
Yes, I am.
Okay, what was your question?
Well, contained in the Glaze recommendations, there are a number of recommendations, and of course, we're familiar with the note to reorganize the system with the changes that we're seeing with principals and the school board. But also in those recommendations, there's a note there to concentrate resources into the classroom. And they make a couple of interesting suggestions there, and one is to take 100 specialists that are now in offices and put them back into the classroom 4 to 5 days a week. And another is to have schools as wraparound facilities where students and families can promptly access support such as mental health support, health care, family services, etc. My question is, do you think the government is purposely focusing on this number one recommendation of reorganization to take away interest from classroom conditions?
Thanks for that, Anne. Claudia or Gary?
Hi, it's Claudia. Well, I mean, my short answer is yes. I do think that, Anne, and I'm sorry to say that, but the reality is despite some discussion that implementing the recommendations in the Glaze report will save money, the reality is that they'll probably be cost neutral, or potentially, if they move with the College of Teachers, will cost money. But regardless, they will cost considerably less money than addressing the real needs in classrooms. Because we know to address the needs in classrooms, we'll need to provide more resources, that our classrooms need more resourcing. I think the wraparound services piece is a good one, and it's a start. It provides wraparound services to families in schools. It doesn't necessarily provide more support to students in the classroom. It was an initiative that was begun under the NDP government and one that we are supportive of, but it's not enough. And so in terms of the order in which these reforms are being instituted, I think, as I said at the beginning, we think it's not an accident that the Commission on Inclusive Education is set to report on March 31st, and that it's now been all but arranged that the legislation will be changed and the budget for the year will be passed before they have a chance to get those recommendations and the bill that is connected with it. So we very much think that they've intentionally decided to do this first. The question about why, apart from it's cheaper, I'm still scratching my head, to be honest, and I think a lot of us are. It does a disservice to our students, and it's a little bit difficult to figure out. But I hope that answers your question, and I appreciate it.
Thank you, Claudia. We're going to do another poll question. So this is our third poll question, and there will be 5 options. The question is, who do you trust the most to act in the best interests of students? Number 1, Education Minister Zach Churchill. Number 2, locally elected school boards. Number 3, teachers. Number 4, the Department of Education. Or number 5, outside consultants like Avis Glaze. Again, the question is, who do you trust the most to act in the best interest of students? Press 1 for Education Minister Zach Churchill. Press 2 for locally elected school boards. Press 3 for teachers. Press 4 for the Department of Education. Or press 5 for outside consultants like Avis Glaze. Please take a moment there to vote. I can see a number of votes coming through. And we're going to go to the phone line again. We're going to speak to Sharon. Sharon, are you there?
I'm there. Hello. How are you?
Go ahead. What's your question?
Actually, it's more of a comment, Kyle. I've heard many times during my years it takes a community to raise a child. And teachers are the backbones of our community. They have many strengths and they're dedicated. They're also parents, so they feel the pressures the same as we do as parents with our children in school. You know, it's all about our children, their education, classroom conditions, and supports in the classroom. My children are out of school, but my youngest struggled with learning disabilities, and the teachers were there to help and support her through this. You know, education is the most important thing we have, and the people who will lose from all the morale issues that are going on and this Glaze report, it's going to be our children and their education. So we have to, you know, get public support so they understand that our teachers are very dedicated and understand how hard they work as teachers, and that it's the government breaking the morale and dividing the workers and then standing back and blaming the workers for the issues in the classrooms and the schools.
Well, thanks for that, Sharon. And before I ask Gary or Claudia to reply, I just thought I would let folks know that 89% of you think that you trust teachers more than anyone else in the healthcare system. So thank you for answering that poll question. Over to you, Gary and Claudia, for Sharon's comments.
Well, it's Gary, Sharon, thanks so much for what you've said, because it just pours out of your comments the sense of gratitude and indebtedness that you feel on behalf of your own family towards the people who taught your kids. And I think that people all over the province are full of this sense. That you speak about it with respect to the challenges that one of your children had. I think we all understand how much has been given to our kids by our teachers, and in particular in these recent years, when we have now the most highly qualified body of teachers in the history of the province. I think that Zach Churchill and Stephen McNeil should pause to consider for a moment what a person does to become a teacher. You get a 4-year degree, and then you get a 2-year education degree, and most people who have gone and done those 6 years do so without any guarantee at all that there's going to be a job in teaching at the other end for them. And then they go through a whole long period of term positions before they're eligible to apply for the other positions. They do this because they're filled with a deep vocational sense. So what is the number one thing that you have to make schools work? You need teachers filled with a deep, meaningful motivation to impart themselves and give themselves to kids. This is the thing that the government has been trampling on. As a previous caller said, that the government has been demeaning. And you're right that it's exactly the wrong path for us to be going down if we understand the breadth of what's being contributed to our communities and our families by the members of the teaching vocation.
Great. Thank you so much, Gary. A reminder that you can press *3 at any time to get added to the queue to ask a question or make a comment. We do have hundreds of questions coming in, so please do make sure if you want to get in the queue that you press *3. We've got about 40 minutes left for this teletown hall. We're going to go to another question now from Clara. Clara, are you with us?
I am.
Okay, what was your question or comment?
I have a little of both, and good evening to everyone. I guess the first thing I would say is that I absolutely disagree with the appointment of advisory board members. I think it's quite right to say that leaves us open, for lack of a better word, it leaves us open further to Trump land. It's a blow to our democratic practice in education, and it's a blow to democracy itself. So I feel strongly that elected school boards are, at first instance, the community's connection to the education system and its voice. something else that I think is important to say is that saving money is not the answer in education. If we want to save money, we can just stop sending them. That's not the answer. Transforming the classrooms, transforming the environment, I think is the answer. And again, I would also add that I'm not sure when we look at our education system if we're being fair. I don't know that our education system is broken. I don't know that it needs fixing. It sort of has us looking at the glass half full instead of, I think we should be concentrating on the richness that we do have in our system and what works well, right? And working from there. We did close the small schools, as the gentleman earlier said, and we expanded and grew instead. So we have to expect that there are going to be expansion and growing issues in schools that are centralized in the manner that they are. The last comment I'd make before I ask a question is that I think, just 1 second.
Oh, looks like we've got a pet who wants to join the call too.
I was going to say to you that it seems to me that it's a poor. Sorry, I have a dog who's barking at someone coming up the driveway. I just think it's a poor example to our students. If we talk about fixing the education system and what we do is we tear apart our school boards and the connection to community, it's a poor example to our students who would go on to work in the field of politics or government or business as regards lessons in cohesion and communication and problem solving and cooperation. It's as if Mr. McNeil decided none of that should work. We'll just tear it apart, and we'll centralize it here, and we'll put friends in office. That's not the best thing to do. The question I have for you is, with the new plan of action, how do you feel school safety, including mental health issues and bullying issues, might be affected?
Okay, Claudia or Gary?
Hi, Claire. It's Gary. I'll just wanted to say a few things about your opening comments, because you raised there an awfully important point. That is the importance of democracy. You said that this is as though it comes from Trump land. I don't think that's an exaggerated word for you to use. We need to think about the scope of what is being proposed here in these Churchill changes, the abolition of an entire level of elected governance in our province. And there's worth saying a few things about that particular level of elected governance. It's worth pointing out, for example, that it is the only level of governance where there are more women than men in Nova Scotia. That's going to be done away with. It's the only level of governance where we have guaranteed representation for African Nova Scotians on all the 7 English boards. There is no result that can happen in a school board election in the 7 English boards that does not include an African Nova Scotian representative. That's to be completely done away with. We have a provision in our system for electing school boards in Nova Scotia that there will be Indigenous representatives, Mi'kmaq representatives on our boards. This is a marvelous exercise, a demonstration of effective representation and democratic functioning. The whole thing with the Churchill changes, the Glaze recommendations, is to be taken to the landfill and dumped. And you're absolutely right. What kind of a lesson in civics, what kind of a lesson in the kind of society we want, what kind of a lesson in democracy does this show to the students of our schools? Now, your second point about mental health, and Claudia is going to just make a comment.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a little bit difficult. Of course, when we talk about what the implications of this will be, we can look to healthcare, we can look to the past, but we don't know really. Like, we've never really been in this situation. We can guarantee reduced morale among teachers, but beyond that, we're finger painting. I think I would say with some certainty that, when the healthcare amalgamation went through, certainly mental health services suffered. and I would not be surprised if the same was true in this type of amalgamation. As Gary points out, we are losing a lot of important voices at the table by implementing these changes. And I'll just repeat it again because it bears repeating that, teachers have been very clear about what they need to deal with these issues of increased mental health challenges, increased bullying, increased violence in their classrooms, and that is added support, added expertise, and added help. And none of that is forthcoming from the government at the moment. So I would say that, that's our sense of it. But certainly we don't see anything that suggests that situation would improve based on these changes.
Thanks for that, Gary and Claudia. We're going to go to our fourth poll question of the evening. The question is, which of the following best describes your relationship to the school system? Press 1 if you're a parent. Press 2 if you're a grandparent. Press 3 if you're a teacher, which also includes principals and vice principals. Press 4 if you are another staff member in the education system. Or press 5 if you're a member of the general public. Again, the question is, what of the following best describes your relationship to the school system? Number 1, a parent. Number 2, grandparent. Number 3, teacher and principals. Number 4, other staff in the education system. And number 5, a member of the general public. Please take a moment there to vote. And while folks are voting, we're going to go to another question, this time from Cheryl. Cheryl, are you there with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, go ahead.
I've actually got two questions, and I hope they're fairly quick. But one is around the principals and vice principals, and my experience with my children in elementary school is that our vice principal teaches in a classroom 80% of the time and is in the office only the other 20% of the time. So based on my view of the education system, it seems like a teacher like that might be more inclined to stay in the union and stay as a teacher. And her decision about this being in the union or being an administrator isn't really about returning to the classroom because that's where she works most of the time right now. So if we see this sort of exodus from administrative positions in schools where teachers want to stay teaching and they don't want to be administrators, where is the province going to find administrators? Do they even have to be teachers to be an administrator in a school?
Okay, Gary and Claudia, over to you.
Thanks for your question, Cheryl. And I think it's, your questions, they're super important ones. And the reality is that there are still a lot of very big questions around this that we have as well. So I'll try and address the points that you raised. I think the situation you describe is very common, particularly once you get out of the Halifax Regional Municipality. In smaller schools, we know, in larger schools too, in municipalities, but particularly in rural schools, we know that the administrators are in the classroom an awful lot. So what happens? Indeed, what happens? What we know right now is that the Department of Education and the Minister of Education has said that teachers must choose between being in the union or being administrators. If they determine that they would like to remain teaching and in the union, teachers have also been told that they may not, at least in the Halifax municipality, that they may not stay in the schools that they are in currently. Now, there may be reasons for that. We don't know what they are, but certainly it makes the decision harder. It incentivizes administrators to remain as administrators. But as we know, most administrators, and as I said earlier on the call, really do consider themselves teachers first. So we do anticipate that many teachers will go back to the classroom. Now, the question of where they're going to find the administrators is a big and very thorny one. And this is one of the things that we are going to be looking very closely at when the government tables its legislation. Right now, an administrator, a vice principal or a principal must be a teacher. We would not be surprised, based on the comments we've heard, based on the Glaze report, and based on the ideological program from which it springs, to see that, in fact, administrators may no longer be required to be teachers. They may or they may not. I know that many people are very afraid that the Glaze report and the recommendations contained therein are very reminiscent of many sort of more American models of governance, which treat school much more as an organization to be administrated without recognizing its unique character as a nurturing educational facility. So we are very concerned about that. Where will they find those people? We have no idea. We're asking the same questions that you are. And, another big outlier in this whole conversation is cost. So, the government says it's going to save money, but we know we have a teacher shortage. We know that these admins are stretching themselves to be in the classroom, to be administrators. So where are they going to replace the lost administrators and or teachers? Who knows? But it's certainly a very unnerving aspect of this whole conversation, and I thank you for bringing attention to it.
Thanks so much, Claudia. We're going to go to Al. Al, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Thanks for taking my call and my question. So my question is, how do we stem the tide of the current, I'll call it the railroading of opinions from this current government? So it started with healthcare. It's now in education, where the people who have what I would describe as the most stake in the care of the people of the province are shut out of decisions that are critically important decisions for us as a public. So that's my question, is how do we stem that tide?
Thanks, Al. Gary or Claudia?
Yes, thanks for this thought, Al. I think it's important to remember when we think about this government and the making of mistakes that they've really made two types of mistakes in their first 4 years. They've made types of mistakes that they've recognized and backed up from, and they've made types of mistakes that they haven't recognized, and they have pressed forward with terrible determination and done all kinds of destruction. So it's very important to see that these Churchill changes, these Glaze recommendations, end up in the first category. I think, for example, you'll remember when in December 16, when they said that the children of the province were going to be locked out of the schools of the province. That was how they were going to proceed. Teachers couldn't be trusted to look after them. And there was an enormous outcry from families and parents all over the province. They quickly realized this is a terrible mistake, and they backed up. I think the year before that, in 2015, you may remember they made some changes to seniors' pharmacare, which were essentially dishonest, and it wasn't until people had a couple days to look at them they realized that there were large categories of seniors who were going to be paying a lot more. There was an immediate outcry, and the government realized this was a big mistake, and they backed up. Other times, as with, for example, the mistake they've made on the film tax credit, the evidence was shown to them, and they just pressed ahead with it. They pressed ahead with the imposing of a contract on teachers. So what made the difference? The difference was made by strong, sustained, community by community, household by household outcry. When people raise an outcry and say, this cannot be borne, this cannot be countenanced, we will not have this, governments are often forced to listen. I think it's very important that people, in every setting where we are, that we say to one another, we have got to have a school system that is good enough for our kids. Does it help the situation of our kids in classrooms to rearrange and wipe out school boards? Not one iota. Does it help the situation of kids in our classrooms to take principals and vice principals out of the union? Not one particle. Does it help kids of the province in challenges in classrooms? Does it help them to have a college of teachers as professional accreditation? Not one particle. So we need to see that there is an outcry raised from every cry of the province that says kids in classrooms, kids in classrooms, kids in classrooms. Address those problems. Don't create new problems that don't need to be fixed and create chaos and disorganization throughout the system. If there's a loud enough voice, even the McNeil Liberals have to listen.
Thanks for that, Gary. We're going to go to our next caller, and I think we've got Randy on the line. Are you there, Randy? Oh.
Hello, you got me there.
Oh, there we go. Go right ahead. What's your question?
Oh, sorry about that. I had everything on speaker. Thanks for taking my call. Thanks for the outreach as well. I appreciate that. My comments are mostly already been said by now. The only part that maybe could be elaborated on further, when we were speaking about the school boards and the abolishment of them and how that's a travesty against democracy and removes a local voice in what our children are being taught. And I think it's important to maybe I can get you to comment on how that puts whatever provincial government is in charge. It gives them a tremendous amount of power to teach our children what they want to be taught, and that includes things like textbooks and lesson plans and such that can greatly affect our children's upbringing. We don't have the same voice in that if we don't have our local elected representative. That's the only thing I can really add on to what the caller before me said.
Thanks so much for that comment, Randy. Over to you, Claudia and Gary.
Hi, it's Claudia. Thanks for your question, Randy. I mean, I think certainly the loss of that level of oversight and elected body in the form of the school board is of great concern. In terms of textbooks, I'm not so sure. That's still a question we have. One of the elements of the Glaze report was more of those decisions would in fact be devolved to the very local school level. We don't know what that looks like yet, but your point overall is very well taken. There are a number of decisions and pieces of work that the school board undertakes that we have no idea where the locus of those decisions will be. Who will decide on things like snow days? Who will hire teachers? Who will decide what qualifications those teachers who are being hired need? A vice principal said to me this morning, she said, when I started teaching in another province, the first question they asked in the interview was, do you love children and do you love teaching? And if they didn't believe that the answer to those two things were yes, you didn't get hired. And, that's what we want. That's what I want for my children. I have more faith in that if those decisions are being made at a local level. And we don't know that those will anymore. And certainly, that goes out as far as we know that some school districts and some schools within those school districts have specific programming that's unique to their environment or their local needs, and we have no idea if or whether those kinds of programs will continue or who will make the call. So I think your concerns are very well grounded, and I think we're not sure yet how it will all play out, but we are concerned.
Randy, it's Gary speaking. I just wanted to point out what awfully important words you've used here in your comments. There are two words that should never be allowed to be set aside in conversations about governance of any sort in Nova Scotia. You use the words local voices. Anything that's going to work in Nova Scotia has to hear local voices. We can think about the present crisis we have in our healthcare system. When you ask doctors or other healthcare providers why it is that the healthcare system has got to be in such a mess, and they speak over and over again about the super centralized one singular health bureaucracy that was put in place, and they'll often say things like, there's nobody for us to call anymore. They don't know about the particular circumstances we have here in, let's say, industrial Cape Breton or Pictou County or on the South Shore or any of the other very different regions that we have in Nova Scotia. So to think that with one central administration, you can answer and carry out the needs of the very different parts that we have in our province is really the worst kind of folly. The difficulty is we've seen now how this works in healthcare. The present situation we have with our hospitals clogged with people that aren't hospital patients, they're nursing home residents who haven't got a bed in a nursing home, our emergency rooms clogged and dysfunctional, over 100,000 people without a doctor. All of this began to bubble over and come to a sharp point from the moment that all the energy in the healthcare system was put on creating that one super central health board. And what they lost when they did that was local voices. And so now they're proposing to do the same thing in education that they did in healthcare, to have a system where local voices will be set aside. But local voices cannot be set aside in Nova Scotia if you are going to have an effective system for our kids. So I think you've made a very, very important point.
Thanks for that, Gary. We're going to go to our fifth poll question of the evening. So there are four options for this one, and the question is, outside of the classroom, what do you think is the most pressing issue facing our schools? You can press 1 for maintenance of school facilities, press 2 for school closures, press 3 for issues around busing, and press 4 for access to before and after school programs. Again, the question is, outside of the classroom, what do you think is the most pressing issue facing our schools? Number 1, the maintenance of school facilities. Number 2, school closures. Number 3, busing. And number 4, access to before and after school programs. Please take a moment there to vote. We're going to go back to the phone lines, and we've got Marie. Marie, are you still there?
Yes, I am.
Okay, what was your question?
Well, first off, thank you very kindly for including me in this tonight, and all subjects and questions this evening were very, very interesting to hear. And but I feel an important subject to me is bullying in the schools. Okay, I know it's always going to be there. Now, years ago when my children went to school, bullying, if there was anything there, they took care of it themselves. Never ever come home to tell us this was going on or that was going on. But anyway, if your party were to get in, what could you add to doing that this government is not doing now to stop the bullying in the schools? Now, my grandson goes to an elementary school. He's 7 years old. He's very diverse, very smart, very intelligent, and he's got a lot of great teachers there to back him up too as well. He was being bullied, and he never ever retaliated because he knows better. But also being diverse, it helped as well. But there was a lot of children from outside of the country in the school that was the bullies, to my grandson. And, of course, it made a lot of hard feelings, like with me deep down inside, as to what our government can do to speak up and actually take care to get something done about this. Because mental health fits in big time with this. It does play a big part on the child. The child can call a helpline, speak to them, on a 7-year-old level, okay, talk with them on the helpline, and nothing be discussed with the parent or other, just between the 7-year-old, which is just a child, a baby, to the person on the other end of the phone, and everything is kept hush-hush. You know, this child needs, as you have been saying, to be heard, and I guess he needs to be heard through us. Now, as a grandparent, like I was saying, I'd like to know what there is that your party could add to this bullying to try to get it to stop. I mean, like I say, it's probably not going to.
I'm going to have to interrupt you there, Mary. I'm sorry about that. We've only got about 10 minutes left for this, and I want to try to get through as many questions as we can. So I'm going to turn it over to Gary and Claudia about that question around bullying.
Sure, I can do it. Hi, Marie. Thanks so much for your question. And I hear the pain in your voice. And, you know, when I think of my children in school, I can't imagine them facing that situation, and so many children do. So I appreciate you bringing the question forward. It's an important one. You know, I think it's a big question. If it wasn't a big question, we'd have an easy answer for it. But I think, you know, what your question points to is how are we making sure that we're taking care of all children, not just most children? Because we know that not all children are most children. Children, you know, all children have very diverse needs, and some have more needs than others in a variety of ways. And we know that there is an explosion of these kind of behaviors, bullying and otherwise, in schools. And our contention is that a lot of that has to do with our social safety net eroding. So, you know, we have the highest rate of child poverty in Canada. We have huge issues outside of the school. I'm not saying that that's an issue for your family, but it certainly is for many. And so, you know, I think what we argue for day in and day out, inside the legislature and out, is greater supports for the people who need them the most. And those could be diverse learners, those could be people living in poverty, but the people for whom the status quo just isn't working. And so we know in schools there are a lot of kids for whom the status quo isn't working. And that's a big reason why, you know, we are trying to make the point that that classrooms and teachers and children need more support. And I think that, you know, there just aren't enough bodies and there just isn't enough attention in the school to be able to meet the needs of all students. It's what we're hearing from parents and grandparents and teachers and children themselves. So I think that by addressing issues outside of the classroom and trying to kind of nurture healthy, whole communities that don't have food insecurity, that don't have mental health issues, you know, by having a robust mental health system that's actually accessible by most of the population, which we know right now there are huge waiting lists, and the public system is terribly difficult to access for anyone, including children, that would go a long way towards beginning to address this thorny challenge.
Thank you so much for that, Claudia. We've got about 10 minutes left for this call. We're going to do another poll question, one more question from the phone, and then I'm going to ask Claudia and Gary to make some closing comments. So our sixth poll question of the night: the province released the recent Glaze report with very limited consultation. What kind of consultation would you like to see on the future of public education in Nova Scotia? Press 1 for meetings around the province open to everyone. Press 2 for consultation with key stakeholder groups. Press 3 for online consultation. Or press 4 for a public inquiry led by an independent commission. Again, the question is, the province released the recent Glaze report with very limited consultation. What kind of consultation would you like to see on the future of public education in Nova Scotia? Press 1 for meetings around the province open to everyone. Press 2 for consultation with key stakeholder groups. Press 3 for online consultation. Or press 4 for a public inquiry led by an independent commission. We've got time for one more question, and I'm going to go to Kim. Kim, are you there?
Hi, how are you?
Great. How are you doing this evening?
Good.
Good. What's your question?
Mine's more of a statement. I'm an EA who works in the school system in the Truro area. My concern is with the government wanting to implement these report findings and wanting one central school board, how the funding is going to go to help our students with special needs and learning disabilities. I'm in a classroom been in classrooms where there's like 25 students and there's 2 on the spectrum, there's 3 that are learning disability, there's ADHD students that aren't even diagnosed. So my fear is if we're centralized into one board and the money starts in Halifax, where's the money going to trickle to? Are we going to get left out in the cold in the rural areas when everything's centralized?
Thanks for that, Kim. Gary or Claudia?
Hi, Kim. I'm so glad to hear your question, and I'm so glad you called in, and I want to take a moment and just thank you, because you have one of the hardest jobs in showbiz, as they say, and you know, we are all very well aware of the hard work in challenging conditions that EAs put in, and I, as a parent, am really thankful for that. You raise an incredibly important question. The truth is we don't know. We worry for that and many other reasons about the centralization of services and decision making in Halifax. But again, you know, we have a Commission on Inclusive Education which is studying these issues. So, you know, as you, I'm sure, are much more well aware than I, you know, there are insufficient supports in classrooms. Our inclusive education system isn't truly inclusive because not everyone has access to what they need to actually participate meaningfully in a classroom. And many of those, you know, there are lots of issues that go all across the board with that were raised by the Commission on Inclusive Education. You know, we know right now that technically EAs are only allocated for students who need them for physical reasons. So they're a flight threat, or they need a feeding tube, or, you know, a physical reason. They are not meant to be, although they are sometimes allocated for students who need help learning. And so for that and any number of other reasons, we need to look at and create a much more robust system of inclusion in our schools, and we have no idea what impact, if any, this report will have, and we suspect that, you know, it will serve to distract from the results of the Commission on Inclusive Education, which will report on March 31st, and which will hopefully give us some good direction towards the work that we need to be doing to support and honor the work that you and so many other professionals are doing, and to make sure that all children have access to it who need it.
Thank you so much for that, Claudia. We've got about 5 minutes left, and I'm going to ask Gary and then Claudia to make some final comments. I want to thank everybody who joined us tonight. We had over 5,000 people on this call and hundreds of questions come in, and I am sorry that we didn't get to all of the questions. If you do want to get in touch with the NDP caucus office, you can always send your thoughts or your questions to ndpcaucus@novascotia.ca. That's ndpcaucus@novascotia.ca. Now I'm going to turn it over to Gary for some closing thoughts.
Well, thanks, Kyle, and thanks everybody that's been participating in our conversation this evening. What we've been doing together, thinking about the Churchill changes this evening, is the very kind of vibrant democratic functioning, the very kind of vibrant democracy that the government is proposing to wipe out by getting rid of local school boards across the province. Now, I think about a question that a caller asked earlier in the evening. He said, look, I cannot understand why in the world would they do this? What is their motivation? What is behind this? I think it's important to understand that with the present government of Nova Scotia, it is their belief, it is their ideology to want to operate the province in a super centralized command and control kind of way. It is at the core of their whole understanding of their enterprise. I mean, there are two visions of Nova Scotia. One is Nova Scotia that is full of richly diverse regions, richly diverse cultures. Another is a vision of Nova Scotia, which is the city-state of Halifax, where everything else is paved over and painted green. The present government of Nova Scotia operates on the second picture. That's the picture that animates everything we have in these terrible proposals for the school system. And the proof of this is to go back to their first mandate. You remember when they first came to power in 2013, they said, We are going to make one super centralized health board. We're going to get rid of all district local health authorities, and this will make the care of patients and health care in Nova Scotia much improved. That happened in 2013, 2014, and now in 2018, we know where we are. We're in the midst of the worst breakdown and crisis of our healthcare system that we have seen in Nova Scotia in a generation. The government, by the way, doesn't think so. When we question them about this, they say, no, everything is fine. There are a few areas that need some improvement, but they steadfastly refuse to recognize what everyone in the province sees, that there is, in fact, a crisis in our healthcare. What they did in their first mandate for healthcare and in healthcare, now in their second mandate, since they were elected in 2017, they are proposing to do to education. That is exactly the program of super centralization that, with the Churchill changes is in front of us. It's a pathetic, a terrible, unconscionable combination of arrogance, incompetence, and hubris, and we in the NDP are dedicated to the full force of our energy to opposing these Glaze recommendations and Churchill changes. So thank you to everyone for taking part in the conversation this evening.
Thank you so much, Gary. Claudia, we've got about a minute and 30 seconds left if you'd like to say some closing words.
Yeah, that's just plenty for me. All I want to say is to thank everyone for coming and to encourage you not to fall into the current distillation of this dispute as being government versus union. I think it's very important that we acknowledge that those of us who are concerned about children in classrooms across Nova Scotia have a voice that deserves to be heard on this issue. And so if you're one of those people, teacher, parent, EA, grandparent, or concerned citizen, I just really urge you to make your voice heard and not to let this be distilled into a black and white conversation that is easily dismissed by the government when they try to railroad these changes through. I really appreciate you all being on the call, and of course I'm always available for any further thoughts or ideas. So thank you again so much.
Thank you so much, Gary. Thank you so much, Claudia. And thank you to the hundreds and thousands of people who joined us tonight. It has been a pleasure to be your moderator. Again, if you'd like to be in touch with the NDP caucus, if you have questions or comments that you didn't have a chance to ask, you can email us at ndpcaucus@novascotia.ca. That's ndpcaucus@novascotia.ca. Thank you so much for spending your evening with us, and looking forward to seeing you in the days ahead and hearing more of your thoughts as we get ready for the legislature. Have a good night.